Why is it that when a black woman walks into luxury, she's treated like a criminal instead of a queen?
Cassandra Bell was more than a first-class passenger, she was a billionaire CEO, the mind behind a $5 billion investment empire.
But to them,
she was just another suspicious black woman who didn't look like she belonged. Asterisk.
Have you ever wondered what it costs a black person just to exist in spaces they've earned?
Because on that day, it cost her humiliation, but it cost the airline something far greater, $5 billion.
This isn't just about racism on a plane, it's about a reckoning.
A woman who turned her pain into power. Before we begin, if you believe in justice, dignity, and black excellence,
subscribe to Behind the Billions, and let's lift up every voice they've tried to silence.
The jet bridge was unusually silent, as if the air itself sensed something was about to shift.
Cassandra Bell adjusted her sleek coral orange dress, the tailored fabric hugging her figure with boardroom authority.
She walked confidently toward her first-class seat, her boarding pass still warm in her hand. Around her, murmurs stirred, quiet, curious, almost rehearsed.
A man in a navy suit gave her a double-take.
A woman clutched her purse tighter.
No one said it out loud, but they didn't have to.
Then came the voice behind her.
"Excuse me, ma'am. Please step aside." Two uniformed airport security officers flanked her from behind. Their badges shone like spotlights, their stances rigid with urgency.
The younger officer's hand hovered too close to his holster. The older one avoided her eyes.
Passengers craned their necks. Someone whispered, "What did she do?" Cassandra's heart dropped, but her expression didn't flinch.
"I'm sorry," she asked, calm but alert.
"We've been asked to escort you off the plane. Please come with us quietly."
"For what reason?" she replied, still composed.
"I've passed security. I'm in the right seat. And I haven't even buckled my belt yet."
The flight attendant approached, eyes wide but lips sealed. She offered nothing.
No defense. No apology.
Then, a cold voice came over the intercom. "Passenger Cassandra Bell, please disembark and speak with security."
Now. It wasn't a request.
It was a command dressed as caution.
And Cassandra understood instantly. This wasn't about a ticket. This wasn't about protocol. This was about presence. Her presence. A black woman. Alone. In first class. Dressed in power.
Owning space they didn't believe belonged to her.
She glanced around.
Faces stared with silent judgment.
No one spoke. No one stood for her.
She sighed, not in fear, but in disappointment. Then, wordlessly, she stood tall. She lifted her head, clutched her leather tote, and stepped into the aisle like a queen walking through a courtroom.
Not a tear in her eye. Not a tremble in her hands. She walked past every seat. Every face. Every unspoken accusation.
The officers followed behind like shadows.
Watching. Hesitant. Conflicted.
One whispered, "Ma'am, this won't take long."
She didn't reply.
She didn't know him comfort. At the end of the walkway, just before stepping into the open terminal, she turned slightly, just enough for the cameras, oh yes, someone was filming, and said softly,
This is going to cost you more than you think."
And with that, Cassandra Bell, Harvard graduate, Wall Street powerhouse, founder of a multi-billion-dollar firm, disappeared through the glass doors.
But not as a victim. As a storm.
One that was about to rewrite the rules of who gets to belong on planes, in power, and in the airspace of respect. Long before she was escorted off that plane, Cassandra Bell knew what it felt like to be unseen.
Born and raised in the heart of Detroit, she grew up in a two-bedroom apartment above a laundromat.
Her mother, Denise, worked double shifts at a hospital and cleaned homes on weekends just to make ends meet.
Cassandra didn't have toys, she had library cards. She didn't have vacations, she had notebooks filled with dreams.
She was the quiet one in class, always observing, always absorbing.
She knew early on that if she wanted a seat at the table, she'd have to build the table herself. By age 14, she was tutoring college students in math.
By 16, she was coding software and balancing her mother's bills. She applied to Harvard with a personal essay that brought admissions officers to tears and earned her a full-ride scholarship. There, she learned to navigate the spaces where people stared at her like she didn't belong. The Ivy League was polished, prestigious, and quietly exclusionary. She saw classmates with generational wealth, with connections she couldn't even dream of. She ate in dining halls where donors' kids talked loudly about yachts while professors mistook her for a scholarship intern.
But she didn't complain. She conquered. She graduated top of her class in economics and went straight to Wall Street, where, once again, she was the only one. The only black woman in the room. The only voice that wasn't invited, just tolerated. Still, she made them listen. Cassandra rose through the ranks of firms where boardrooms were lined with portraits of old white men who built empires off the backs of workers like her mother. She knew their language. She mastered their game. And then, one day, she flipped the script. She left her six-figure job behind and launched Bell Capital, a firm that didn't just chase profit but invested in purpose. In 10 years, she grew it into a financial titan, $18 billion under management. Funding hospitals in underserved areas. Empowering minority-owned businesses. Building clean transit systems. And yes, backing major airlines in their expansion into global markets. She had everything success demanded: power, vision, legacy. And yet, all it took was one flight for it to be snatched away in the eyes of strangers. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because no matter how far she climbed, there were still people who looked at her and saw an imposter. A threat. A mistake. Cassandra sat in the holding area that day, staring at the cold metal bench beneath her, and whispered to herself. After all this, still not enough. But something shifted in that moment. It wasn't defeat. It was a decision. They had mistaken her for someone powerless. They were about to find out who Cassandra Bell really was. The fluorescent lights in the holding room buzzed faintly. The space smelled like old coffee and stale anxiety. Cassandra sat upright in a metal chair, flanked by two security guards who now looked noticeably less confident. The silence was thick until a woman in a navy blazer walked in briskly, clipboard in hand, jaw clenched. The name tag read, Karen Whitmore, Regional Operations Manager. She didn't greet Cassandra. She didn't even sit. Miss Bell, she said curtly. We received reports that you boarded the plane without proper identification. You were seated in first class without confirmation from crew. Cassandra blinked slowly. My assistant checked me in. I scanned my boarding pass at the gate. The airline confirmed my flight via email yesterday. What part of that was unclear? Karen didn't look up from her clipboard. We're simply responding to the crew's concerns and complaints from fellow passengers. Concerns? Cassandra raised an eyebrow. What concerns, exactly? The woman finally looked up, expression unreadable. Some passengers said your behavior was suspicious. You seemed out of place. You didn't respond when addressed. Cassandra exhaled sharply through her nose. I had headphones in. I was reading a report. Being black in first class doesn't make me suspicious. One of the officers shifted uncomfortably in his stance. The younger one murmured, Ma'am. I think we've made a mistake here. Karen cut in sharply, Thank you, officer. We're handling this. Then she turned back to Cassandra with a forced smile. You have to understand. We have protocols. We can't take risks. Risks, Cassandra repeated coldly, like a woman with a multi-million-dollar seat allocation and a track record of funding the very planes you operate? Karen looked thrown. Excuse me? Cassandra reached into her tote bag and calmly pulled out her Bell Capital executive ID. Embossed. Platinum trimmed. Below her name was the title, Founder and CEO. Then she slid out a document, an investor relations contract with that very airline, bearing Bell Capital's logo. Karen's face fell. The officers looked stunned.
I manage $5 billion in infrastructure funding for your expansion projects, Cassandra said evenly.
I own a stake in your airline.
I help decide who you hire.
Silence. And then Cassandra asked the question that didn't need an answer. Tell me, if I were white, in a pantsuit and pearls, would we be having this conversation? Karen opened her mouth. Closed it. Swallowed.
I'm deeply sorry for the misunderstanding, she muttered. You're, of course, free to reboard the flight. Cassandra stood slowly, folding the documents and sliding them back into her bag. No, thank you, she said, locking eyes with Karen.
You don't get to humiliate me, and then offer me my dignity back like it's carry-on luggage.
She walked past them, head high. But not before leaving one final line that would echo in boardrooms, media outlets, and courtrooms.
This conversation isn't over. It's just moved to a different altitude. Cassandra didn't sleep that night.
She sat by her penthouse window, watching the city lights flicker beneath the clouds.
Her phone buzzed non-stop: emails, texts, news alerts.
A blurry video had surfaced online, her walking down the aisle with two officers, poised, powerful, and silent.
The headline read: Black executive escorted off plane in alleged racial profiling incident. It was going viral. She hadn't even spoken publicly yet, but the world had already started asking, who is this woman? By sunrise, Cassandra had made a decision. She wasn't going to let this slide with a forced apology or a coupon for a future flight. She didn't want an upgrade or a phone call from PR. She wanted justice. And justice, in her world, spoke in numbers. Big ones. She summoned her executive board to an emergency virtual meeting. I was publicly profiled, she told them. And I will not allow our firm's name to remain tied to any organization that permits this kind of systemic humiliation. One partner asked, You mean you're pulling funding? She looked directly into the camera. All of it. A silent gasp spread across the boardroom windows on screen. We are divesting every dollar from that airline. That's $5 billion in infrastructure, route expansion, and technology development. Effective immediately. Some hesitated. Others nodded solemnly. Cassandra continued, We are not just investors. We are influencers of policy, culture, and change. If they can treat me like that, what are they doing to people with less voice, less power, less protection? Within hours, Bell Capital's legal team issued the withdrawal. And that afternoon, Cassandra held a press conference. Standing at the podium, she wore the same coral dress she'd been profiled in: symbolic, intentional, unshaken. Her tone was composed but resolute. Cameras flashed, and reporters jostled for position. This isn't just about me, she began. It's about the thousands of black professionals who are questioned when they sit in first class. About the mothers who are searched for no reason. About the children taught to shrink in spaces they've earned the right to be in. My money will no longer enable that. She didn't call for a boycott, she called for accountability. She didn't threaten revenge, she demanded reform. The hashtag #MyMoneyMoves exploded across social media. Within 48 hours, the airline stock dipped sharply. Shareholders panicked. Their PR team released a desperate statement: We are reviewing our policies to ensure this never happens again. But the damage had been done. Cassandra didn't just withdraw capital, she withdrew credibility. The very soul of their progress had been funded by someone they refused to respect. And she wasn't done. I'm reallocating every dollar, she said in a later interview, toward businesses that see us, support us, and share our values. For the first time, Wall Street was watching her move. Not as a woman scorned, but as a force awakened. In the weeks that followed Cassandra Bell's decision to pull $5 billion in funding, the shockwaves rippled far beyond Wall Street. News outlets from CNN to Forbes ran features on her bold move. The woman who grounded an airline, one headline read. Others called her the Rosa Parks of finance. For the first time in a long time,
People weren't just talking about racism in customer service, they were watching a black woman rewrite the rules of power. The airline scrambled to recover. Their executives made public apologies. They launched a diversity initiative and created a new advisory board.
But the damage wasn't cosmetic. It was structural. Their investor confidence had cracked.
Their reputation stained. And most painfully, they realized they had underestimated someone who owned more of their future than they did.
But Cassandra? She had already moved on.
She wasn't interested in apologies. She was interested in impact. Within a month, she redirected that same $5 billion into a revolutionary new initiative, an aviation startup led by young, black engineers and entrepreneurs. A regional airline designed for accessibility, inclusion, and luxury where every traveler felt like they belonged. She called it Elysian Air, inspired by the idea of heaven in flight.
And it wasn't just about planes. It was about people.
She funded full scholarships for black students pursuing aviation degrees.
She created internships for women of color in aerospace leadership. She invested in airport technology that used AI to prevent racial profiling during boarding. She helped build terminals in underserved cities, connecting forgotten communities to opportunity. When asked why she didn't just walk away quietly and enjoy her wealth, Cassandra said, "Because silence is the most expensive thing we pay for. And I refuse to pay it anymore." She didn't just reclaim her dignity.
She multiplied it into something larger, something lasting. Soon, celebrities, athletes, and even rival investors began backing Elysian Air. The airline became a symbol of not just resistance, but renaissance. A celebration of what could happen when one woman refused to shrink in the face of racism, and instead expanded into greatness. Cassandra now travels the world, but she flies on her own terms. And every time she boards a flight on her airline, passengers watch her step into the cabin with grace, and flight attendants greet her with respect.
Not out of fear. Not because she's famous. But because she earned it.
And because now, she owns the sky they once tried to deny her.
They pulled her off one flight. So she built her own airline. Cassandra Bell proved that when you're grounded by injustice, you don't fall, you launch.